This is the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast with Garry Taylor.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast. Thank you for joining us yet again. This one is going to be probably a more of a self-indulgent one because we're going to be talking about ourselves. Well, more importantly, it's going to be the Aston Martin Heritage Festival, the fourth one, and it's going to be held on the 31st of August 2024 at the British Motor Museum. And we are recording this at the British Motor Museum, where we've had a launch day where we've had a number of desirable pre-war cars and DB7s here for a photographic shoot, and have some members of the press here as well, including Paul Walton from Aston Martin Driver, and hopefully this will appear in future. And we are celebrating 30 years of DB7 and 90 years of the Ulster and the Mark II. We're not just having those two cars, because everybody's welcome. So if you have an Aston Martin or you're an Aston Martin enthusiast, please do come along. All cars will be welcome. It's not just exclusive for DB7s and Mark IIs and Ulsters. Also at the festival, for the first time this year, we're going to have a big screen, a big diamond screen on an Arctic truck, and we're going to have a professional stage. So it's going to be on TV as well, if you like, or if I'm going to say Wadders TV, and I've got Wadders, Steve Waddingham next to me, who's going to be on stage alongside Wayne Scott, who was, you may recall, was one of the early podcast presenters. So it's going to be a great stage. We're going to have a professional stage, a professional arena, a diamond screen so you can see exactly what's going on, and a roving camera to pick up the DB7s and the pre-war cars. So I'm going to launch straight into the pre-war cars. Steve, you did a excellent post on Aston Martin's social media of 90 years of the Mark II and the Ulster. We do sometimes get caught up in more immediate anniversaries of 60 years of DB5, but you did an excellent post going back to very early days. Why do you think this is important to recognise these early cars?
Well, yeah, I think, Gary, that at the end of the day, lots of us, lots of enthusiasts and lots of even employees of the company over the years have kind of almost grown up on the post-war cars. We all know DB5, and then if you first come into Aston Martin as a subject, you probably know about DB5. You then find out about DB4, and then you might discover the Feltham era cars. So really, the pre-war cars, it seems such a long time ago, doesn't it? It's such a fascinating subject all on its own. It's like another sort of story, really. In fact, it's almost like a bunch of other stories, because there are different decades and different things that
because
happened.
People don't seem to realise that Aston Martin are 110, 111 years old, and realise it goes back that far. I say some people seem to think it starts at DB5, but it does go back a lot further.
Exactly, yeah. And let's start at the beginning, 1913 up to 1919, that sort of foundation period. Things were being sort of shaped very early on with the Bamford Martin setup. Of course, World War I in the middle of all that. And then really things started to get going sort of from 1922 onwards. So 22 was a Grand Prix, French Grand Prix. 23 we actually built cars to sell to the public, and Razor Blade, the record breaker. And then just as they kind of got going, the whole thing just kind of ground to a halt. Bamford and Martin got into financial trouble in 1925. 1926 the whole thing was wrapped up and finished. But of course the Mark carried on with Bert Batelli and Bill Rennick initially, and it kind of was kind of born again, really. So you got the 20s cars are very different from the 30s cars. And then the fascinating thing about the 30s era is that almost every 2 years they completely reinvented the range of cars. So that would be like having DB9, DB11, DB12 every 2 years, in modern kind of parlance. So really, in order to understand those cars, over the years we've split them into what we call a series. So we've got the first series, second series, the third series, and then what we call the 2-litre models. So you've got 4 different categories of this is just for the 1930s period of history. And then before that you've got what we call the Bamford and Martin era cars. So effectively 5 different eras of car built between 1914, when the first car was built, up to 1940. And that's less than 700 cars. So it's a whole nother subject, really.
It is.
And I must admit, it was one I knew nothing about until about sort of 5 years ago when I first started poking around and, finding out more about it, and meeting the people that are alive that do know all about it and learning from them.
The Trust has its own Ulster, and we have been fortunate enough to be invited on several occasions to the AML open days, the employee open days, family days at Gaydon and St Athan, and we do take the car along. The employees there, the staff are always in awe. They just love that car. It turns out to be one of their favourite vehicles because they are beautiful looking cars, aren't they?
They are
very low, big wheels.
Yeah, and I think the Mark II, when you look at a Mark II, and you can sort of distinguish the Mark II by the radiator grille. So it's got a sort of V-shaped grille with vertical, thermostatically controlled shutters. So believe it or not, even back then, when you started the car up from cold, obviously you'd want to warm the radiator up quickly. So during cold weather, those shutters would remain fairly closed to help the car warm up. As it got hotter, the heat would then open, so you would let more air in.
I didn't realise it did
that.
Yeah.
So as you were driving along, they would open up and let more air flow through.
Yeah.
So very clever, really. I mean, we weren't the only people to use those. Bentley had a similar system. But anyway, so that was quite an elaborate thing to have, but also gave the car a very distinctive look. So it's a very elegant radiator grille with those vertical slats, and I always think it makes the car look quite prestigious, quite sort of luxurious. So in many ways, the Mark II models were the beginning of where we are now. So luxury sports cars rather than just being sports cars, which you could argue they were previously.
Now, Steve, if there's one thing that rattles your cage is when somebody points at an old Aston and they say, that's an Ulster.
Yeah, we jokingly say that. It's not an Ulster, and it's not a Vantage, as you and I both know. No. But lots of people with the 70s cars get muddled up with, every 1970s car is a V8 Vantage, and of course some of them aren't. Some of them are V8s. And
so can you define an Ulster? Get it out the way?
So let's deal with the Ulster thing. From 1928, Aston Martin started to build team cars. So these were cars built each year to represent the company in motorsport. So the first two, LM1, LM2, built in 1928. Fast forward to 1934, there were some new team cars being built. So we'd got LM11, LM12 and LM14. You might be wondering what happened to 13. We missed that one out. Could it be unlucky? So we had LM11, LM12, LM14, and those cars became the new team cars. So two of those cars were rebuilt and became LM15 and LM16. So two of those cars were rebuilt, and the reason they were rebuilt was to make them comply with the regulations for the Ulster TT. And from that, the kind of nickname for the cars became Ulster. And now when you think about what they look like, they're quite distinctive because they've got a very rounded, pointed kind of tail. So we now would call that an Ulster body, and it almost became a terminology for a particular shape of body. So a two-seater car with a pointed, curved sort of back on it. And if you look at the back of the car, you'll notice it's hinged, and if you lift it up, if you lift that sort of lid up, the spare wheel is mounted on the floor, so the spare wheel becomes almost like the bumper with the lid closing over the top of it, and it's a very distinctive shape, and that became known as the Ulster body style for certainly for us, and other manufacturers had similar looking cars also called Ulster as well. So you get Austin 7 Ulster is another similar car to look at. But anyway, so the team cars technically they are team cars. So although lots of people call them an Ulster, actually the technical term is it's a team car, and it's LM15 or LM16, whichever number it is. The cars that were built for the public, which were effectively replicas of the team cars, they are called Ulsters, 21 of them.
I've referred to the Trust Ulster. Now, that doesn't have the unique rear hinge panel. It has a four-seater.
Yeah.
And you tend to think Aston Martin, with their Q division these days, they will personalise your car, they'll do bodywork modifications. In a way, MKII existed all those years ago, because they would quite happily modify your Ulster for you into a four-seater, wouldn't they?
Absolutely, and even before Batelli got going, it was exactly the same. So all of the first Bamford Martin cars, they were all bespoke, they're all different. Buy an Aston Martin, have whatever you want, and that applied to the Ulster. So technically, the Ulster was meant to be this kind of, faster, a little bit lighter version of the standard car that you could buy, the Mark II. But yeah, along comes a couple of people who say, can I have a four-seater? So they have a four-seater. So you could argue, well, okay, well, it's technically an Ulster chassis number, but it doesn't really look like an Ulster. But there you go, that's one of the peculiarities that makes it fun. So the other thing about Ulster is, think of it in modern terms, where we have built cars recently called AMR. So we do a Vantage AMR.
Yes.
And what is that car? It's a car that looks like the cars you see racing. So think of the Ulster as being very similar at the time. It was a car that looked like the team car and had had a similar specification. They were guaranteed to do 100 miles an hour. So they were every one of those cars was tested at Brooklands, would not be signed off until it did 100 miles an hour.
I think this appeared in the adverts as well, guaranteed 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, guaranteed 100 miles an hour.
You wouldn't get away with it these days.
£750 for an Ulster. And a Mark II, I think, was again from memory about 570 quid or something like that, round figures. So it's quite a lot more money for an Ulster, which is probably why they only built 20 or so of them. There's one of them is missing, and the others are all accounted for, which is pretty incredible for 90-year-old cars.
It is.
So yeah, I think that's when you look at these cars again, and you really look at them and understand them, they are amazing things. If you look at the Ulster as well, they've got certain features on them that were put into the cars to give the car a competitive edge. So things like a lack of chrome, so the radiator isn't chromed, it's painted. The headlamps are painted. The idea of that was that if you were racing 24 hours, and bearing in mind, although these cars were not going to race for the factory, they were intended for people to buy them, and if they wanted to use them for competition. So they were kind of ready to go almost for 24 hours. So the idea was that at certain times of day, with the position of the sunlight, you could get dazzled. If you got a chrome headlamp bowl in front of you, the light could hit it, and you could get blinded by the reflection. So by having painted rather than chromed features, that helped cut down on the risk of that happening. Another lovely little feature is the on the windscreens. If they have a windscreen, they have like a little side piece of glass that hinges on the side of the windscreen frame. And if you fold the windscreen down, you can take those off, and they become the little aero screens. So they come off the side of the windscreen, and you put them on the bulkhead, and they then become the little cut down racing aero screens. So real clever little features. Individual switches for the lights, so the headlights and side lights could be switched on and off separately. The team cars, every light had a separate switch, and the reason for that was so you could signal to your pits when you were coming around. You could flip one headlamp on or one side lamp on or whichever, and that would be a signal back to the pits. So real clever, advanced thinking.
That's amazing back to that time, isn't it? It's very clever.
Exactly. And all I would say to anyone coming to the festival, and this applies to every Aston Martin, is if you're looking at it and you're not quite sure about why it is a certain way or why it's if you're wondering about the history of the car, then ask the people who own them, because the people who own them will definitely know the story behind the car. So yeah, hopefully people will come onto the festival, see the pre-war cars, and maybe learn a little bit more about them and realise how connected they are to what we do today, because we're still building sports cars, we're still building racing cars, and we build cars that look like racing cars. So it's exactly as we did 90 years ago.
Well, we hope to have plenty of these pre-war cars at the festival. Tom Wood and others are really getting this together for the festival, and we do appreciate their help. So please do come along and come and see some of these pre-war cars. But the pre-war cars is not the only featured model that we're looking towards, Steve. It's 30 years of the DB7, and we've had a photo shoot today, and we have some very desirable DB7s here, and we've got a couple of owners here, which we will come on to in a moment, to speak about their cars. But Steve, 30 years of the DB7, it seems like only yesterday that car was launched at Geneva.
Well, absolutely, and the old sort of thing about feeling old.
Yes.
Well, you do when a car you worked on the launch of, it suddenly becomes 30 years old. It suddenly makes you realise how long you've been around for. But so I was in my sort of early 20s when the car came about, and it was absolutely vitally important to us back then. And you could sit here all day and debate what is the most important Aston Martin of all time. And you could have a very good case for DB5, because arguably DB5 and one car in particular kind of put us on the map forever.
Well, Aston Martin could never really afford to have a pup in its range, could it?
No.
Every car was important.
Yeah.
Signet, well, that's another podcast. I think they.
Well, even the Signet got the last laugh.
Signet got the last laugh today.
Didn't make that many of them, and they're now worth a fortune. But with DB7, there's no getting away from it. It was absolutely, if we didn't have that car, we would not have made it out of the 90s. If you look at the year before DB7 was launched, production was 46 cars globally. Bearing in mind it's a global number of cars sold, 46. So clearly it couldn't go on much longer doing that. And DB7 was our chance to do something different, sell the car to a different audience, a wider market, and also importantly have a car that would comply around the world, because by 92 we were struggling to sell cars in places like America.
Yeah, the V8s weren't.
Yeah, they just weren't complying.
No.
So we'd pulled out the US. So to have a car that would become a world car that you could sell anywhere was obviously going to be vitally important to be able to boost the sales and make more of them. But it was a fairly risky thing to do. It's all down to Ford really providing the funding for us to do it and making the most of what was available. And obviously Ian Callum and his amazing body style that he came up with. And as everybody knows, the original underpinnings, some of the things were sourced from Jaguar, but it's not really fair to call it a Jag-in drag, which is what one of the labels at the time.
Yes, that is a bit harsh.
It is harsh because they're not that at all. There are Jaguar components, but also a lot of it is unique. The body's unique, the engine's unique. It isn't just lifted out of a Jaguar and stuck into a DB7.
At the day of recording, we've got the Trust DB7 concept car down in the foyer, which is making a great interest for the visitors coming here, and it's a delightful looking car, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's got a say a sunroof. It's a Targa roof, maybe.
Yeah, it's got a lift-out roof panel.
And the frisbee wheels.
Yeah,
it's a very delicate looking car, isn't it?
Yeah, and funny enough, in the colour it's in, it's quite what is even now a fairly contemporary sort of colour. It's a sort of mid-grey metallic. So it amazingly I don't think it looks 30 years old, actually. I think it looks more modern than that. And also it's worn very well. It's in really good condition. And hopefully people can see the car either at the museum before the festival or at the festival. And it's also so close to the production version. Most concept cars can be a bit wacky and, things that don't really kind of make it through as they are. But on that car, almost everything on the outside of it is exactly the same as it would be on a production car, and only a few things on the inside really kind of give the game away, and even then you've got to be a bit of a nerd like I am to be able to spot them.
I think whether the car saved Aston Martin or not is debatable, because there are other cars that could be pointed to, but I think the DB7 gave Ford and Aston Martin confidence in the company's future.
Yeah.
Say, we can do this sort of thing. Let's speak to a couple of the owners of these cars. Mike and Jez brought their cars along today for the photo shoot, so thank you very much for taking the time out for your day. Mike, let's start with you first. What flavour Aston Martin DB7 have you got?
So I've got a 2002 DB7 Vantage Coupe.
Right. Coupe. What colour is it?
Mendit Blue.
Mendit Blue. That is a lovely colour. I remember that being at the time. Interior?
It's a split colour, so it's I think it's called Parchment and Pacific Blue, so it's kind of cream and sort of mid-dark blue, yeah.
Right. How long you had the car?
Only 10 months.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. Why did you go for that?
I've liked them for years, really like the look of them as much as anything, because I've only actually previously ever driven one, and to be fair, it probably wasn't the best looked after example, so that didn't go down too well at the time, but I've owned a Jaguar XK8 convertible for 17 years, and because they essentially do a very similar job, both similar sized GT cars, and as you've explained in terms of the history of where they were both developed from, so I guess that probably also slightly put me off, because I kind of thought, well, I'm going to have potentially two cars, because I've get a bit attached to things and didn't want to get rid of the Jag. So probably why it took me so long to actually get round to buying one.
And was this your first Aston?
Yes, it is, yeah. So 10 months in, so very much a newbie, but really enjoying it. What first drew me to them was the styling. I'm really into cars, really into automotive stuff generally, but actually I'm not a speed freak, which probably sounds odd for someone owning a V12 six-cylinder engine car. But for me, it's the whole experience. It's very much the look of them. It's the driving experience once you're actually in the car itself, as well as the styling on the outside. So first and foremost, it's the beautiful styling of it.
I was fortunate enough many years ago to have a DB7 Vantage myself, and like yourself, not a speedy driver. I'm not interested in track days and that sort. And I found the DB7 was a delightful cruiser. And if I can be so bold, I think if you were going to be a bit spirited behind the wheel of a DB7, you may find yourself going backwards somewhere. I think the handling wasn't quite as sharp as, should we say, the Gaydon V8s and DB9s thereafter. But as a driving vehicle for everyday driving, I think that was quite good. Steve, you want to come in on this?
Well, I think anyone from AML will be laughing at that point because they'll know that I once did go backwards in a DB7 and landed rather abruptly in a tree. But so I can vouch for that. When it went wrong, it did go wrong. But they were great cars. And the funny thing is, when you put one next to an SK8, you can see a lot of differences. And obviously, the way that they were built was very different. The DB7 was hand-built, literally hand-built, once it arrived as a body shell. So the body shells came in from Coventry. Most of them were painted at Bloxham, and then they went into build. And the production line was really just, the cars were on a trolley, and they were worked on and then pushed forward. And, the sort of tack time, the time at each station was in the order of around 80 minutes or so. And I think at one point we worked it out that they could build a Model T Ford in 80 minutes, and it was taking us 83 minutes to do one operation on a DB7, so back in the Ford era when you looked at the differences between them. And in reality, a DB7 was about 4 weeks to build, and the materials they were made from was very different as well. So an SK8 from memory had about 1.5 hides of leather in it, whereas a DB7 would have about 7,000
DB7s over production life, and yet today at Gaydon and St Effan, you're doing that annually in a whole range of cars.
Absolutely.
Whereas in the production life of the DB7,
I found something recently when I was looking through stuff, and we'd announced in 2002 that we'd made 1,000 DB7s or over 1,000 DB7s in 1 year, and that was the first time that ever happened. And that was in 2002. So that doesn't seem that long ago that we were celebrating having made over 1,000 of something in 1 year. And so, it was, by our standards, that was a huge amount. But also by the end of DB7, the 7,000 or so cars built, that took us up to 20,000 cars built in total from 1914 when Colescutter was built. So it took 90 years to build 20,000 cars, 7,000 of them were DB7s. So you cannot underestimate how important the car was at the time.
I remember from a previous podcast when we mentioned DB7s before, we had John Muirhead there, and I think it was you and John used to do the factory tours at Bloxham. Is that right? Yeah.
So John, and I'm going to get this right actually, because again I know they'll be listening. Wendy Way.
Wendy, yes.
So Wendy and John used to do a lot of the visits on the i6 DB7. Also another old colleague of ours, a guy called John Spinks, no longer with us. He was another one that also did a lot of tours back in the early days. I came on board to do tours really from the launch of DB7 Vantage, so May 99, and then pretty much up to the end of it with DB7. But there were other people doing it before I got there. But the difference was I was doing it as a full-time job, whereas Wendy and John were doing it on top of their other real work. But certainly those people were very much part of it. And also, if you have a DB7, certainly Wendy's name will appear in every single DB7's paperwork,
right? Because
she ran the admin side of the sales operation.
We're going back to the factory tours. Because the DB7 was, should we say, moving through much faster than the Newport Pagnell V cars, one of the appeal for owners at the time was I wanted to see my Aston Martin being built. Now, if you had a V car at Newport Pagnell, you could probably rock up any time during a period of a few weeks or months and it'll still be there. But with the DB7 being rather spirited along the, I say production line, you know what I'm saying, if somebody wanted to see a DB7 in build, they had a narrow window of opportunity, didn't they, Steve?
Yeah, relatively. I mean, so V cars were at that point about 3 months to build.
Yeah.
So it was like watching a boat being built. You could come in and see the body being made, and then come back a few weeks later and see it at another stage. DB7 was a bit quicker than that, but it was still 4 weeks. It was still long enough
still a long time,
to plan it.
How long does it take to build a car now?
It's actually about the same. It's actually about the same, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not much different really. And so people would come in and see their cars being built. So quite often what would happen is I would meet people when they were first thinking about buying a car. That would be the first visit. That may then lead into, I'm going to have one, let's choose the colours, which often would be the case. Occasionally someone would come back again, do that separately, and then they would come back 6 months or so later to see the car being built. And I wasn't the only person doing this. As time went on, I had other colleagues that joined me to do DB7 tours. So Dean Jordan, Jonathan Calaby, they both did DB7 tours. And then later on, when we got to Gaydon, we had other people doing it. Simon Dean. Dean carried on doing tours for a while. Stuart Bull. A lot of people don't realise Stuart also did factory tours at one point. Famously, he was an inspector on the Vanquish, but he did tours as well. And then there were other people as well as time went on. But yeah, it was a great thing to do. And also, Bloxham was a lovely place to work.
Quite compact, wasn't it?
Yeah, and also quite quaint.
Yes.
People would often follow bearing in mind this is before sat-nav was a common thing, so people would have the map faxed to them. No emails in those days. And they would come barrelling through sort of Banbury, down the A361, and then suddenly think, well, hang on a minute, it can't be here because it's all open countryside. So you come flying down the hill and then go screeching past because you suddenly realise there it is on the right-hand side, there's the factory. And the factory was really a very modern building, but had got a watermill at one end, a farmyard with converted farmhouse and outbuildings, which was our office area. And that was effectively kind of global headquarters, in a back bedroom or a dining room or a upstairs bedroom. That the farmhouse was the sort of centre of the universe for the company before Gaydon eventually was built in 2003. So yeah, very, very different. Cottage industry has never been a more accurate description in the nicest possible way.
Quaint. I think it was from a factory point of view, it seemed very much a stepping stone from the Newport Pagnell premises to Gaydon. It just seemed to be that interim step.
Yeah.
Not by design, but it just seemed to be a stepping stone.
And the building was actually quite modern. So the factory unit was very modern, whereas Newport Pagnell was always an old 1940s building. So, Bloxham always felt clean and tidy in comparison to Newport Pagnell. But actually Newport Pagnell was also organised and tidy and clean inside. It just never really kind of looked that way because it was so old and it was very dark, and so it was unfair really to have criticised Newport, and they were just very different. And actually, again, most people don't realise that Newport Pagnell was actually supplying the interior trim. So early cars were trimmed by an outside company, and then really certainly from DB7 Vantage right the way through to the end of production, all of the trim and the convertible roofs were made at Newport Pagnell and brought over as a kind of kit, basically, with the numbers for the car on, so everything went into the right car. So Newport Pagnell played quite an important role in the DB7 story, and even in the very early days when there were problems with the composite panels, Newport Pagnell also made some of the body panels as well. So some of the front wings were made out of aluminium. Even a few bonnets were made out of aluminium, just to kind of keep production going in the very early few months of DB7.
Going back to Mike, you say you had your car for 10 months.
Yeah.
Any adventures lined up for this year?
Well, I do use it regularly. So
how many miles on it already?
1,900, just over. Yeah,
oh, okay.
2,000. So I try and use it every week. In reality, there is the odd week that you miss, but that'll vary from a short trip to the Aston Martin Heritage Trust Museum,
Splendid.
Go there quite regularly.
Yeah, because you're a volunteer there.
Yes.
You do the tours there when Dom's not available.
Yeah, that's right. So I quite often take it, and then it's quite nice, particularly if people have come around with their kids, because inevitably, obviously, they can't sit in any of the cars on show because of the rarity and value. But I'm quite happy to let them come and have a sit.
I think that's important. I remember myself, and I think we all can around the table. We only be so high, and being able to sit into a special car, but it just puts a seed in your mind, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So that's quite good fun.
Thanks for doing that.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's nice to be able to do it. But also, in answering your question, I'd like to do some maybe longer trip, maybe a few days in Wales or Scotland, or maybe on the continent. So got another good friend of mine who's a petrol head, and he keeps sort of badgering me. So I'm fairly certain we'll sort something out. So yes, I do use it. It's not tucked away and and hardly see the light of day. It does come out regularly, and we get used quite a lot.
Perfect. Jez Rippon, you come along here today. Thanks for bringing your car for the photo shoot. Do you use your car much?
Well, I've owned the car over 15 years now.
Okay.
Came across it by error. I was looking for an AC Ace, and one came up for sale at the H&H auction. I managed to get a catalogue, and while I was flicking through, I noticed that there was a really early DB7 in there, chassis number 10, which was built in late 94, released in early January 95. And as Steve mentioned, Wendy signed quite a bit of my paperwork with Arthur Sinclair as well.
He's a name that comes up quite a bit, isn't he?
Yeah, Arthur. I remember saying he was going to he built the first ones and he built the last ones as well. I think Arthur went round in a circle from memory with his career, and went back to finish off the DB7 production. So yeah, amazing man, and a lot of knowledge and a lot of eye for detail as well that he had.
So number 10, can you describe to the listeners your car?
Yeah, it's obviously one of the very earliest ones that was built. It's the original design that was conceptualised by Ian Callum. It's got the original disc wheels, large disc wheels, which are real Marmite. People either love them or absolutely hate them. I love them. I think it really makes a car. So yeah, it's a very early car. It's got the originally when the cars were released, they had a little plastic sleeve that went over the part of the bodywork which had the instructions for the alarm in. It was on the sun visor. My car's still got that. That's still in place. That was as it was originally released. And it's completely original. It's in excellent condition. It's coming up 80,000 miles. As I said, I've owned it for 15 years, driven it in Europe, been down to Switzerland in it, down to Le Mans. It's not a sports car. I think, as you said...
I think we all agreed on it. It's not a sports car, Mike. I think that's right.
Yeah.
But an amazing Grand Tourer. You know, you can sit on it for 10 to 12 hours and get out the other end, and you feel like you've just stepped into the car. So it's great from that point of view. And as Mike was saying, it's just a beautiful design. It is beautiful. I remember I was, like Steve, in my sort of mid-20s and seeing them sort of whiz round. Some of the footballers used to have them, back in the day, and they were just a beautiful car. And to me, it sort of harked back to the DB4. To me, it looks like a pice of sculpture, as though it's been cut out of one piece of metal.
There's a purity to it, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I guess like everyone else, I'm not exactly sure how I was drawn to Aston Martin. Probably, I guess, through James Bond, I would imagine, seeing the cars. But I loved Aston Martin, and I was really fortunate. My favourite car was the DB4. And 20 years ago, I've managed to get myself a DB4 Series 1, the Earls Court show car. And to me, probably the DB7 was the sort of first car that harked back to that sort of purity.
Yes.
No adornments, cut out of a single piece of metal. There weren't any spoilers on it. There weren't any front sort of lips on it. It just looked absolutely perfect. And Ian, to me, made a fantastic job of the design. And I was also fortunate enough to take the car up to see him at Jaguar when he was design director there, because I wanted him to sign the dashboard. And he was so gracious and gave me so much time. Absolutely fantastic guy.
Let's go back to the wheels, because I remember when the DB7 was launched, and I think the concept car we downstairs, it was taken to HWM, Walton-on-Thames, And I remember Walt Hayes was there at the time. And I think I was invited, or I knew the car was there, and I went there to see it. The first time I've seen the DB7. And on one side, it had the frisbee wheel, shall we call it, and on the other side, it just had like a hubcap, like we tend to see on most of the cars. And I said, well, what's that about? He says, well, we're still trying to decide whether to have the big hubcaps or not. It was certainly a split opinion at the time, wasn't it? But I think now they've become very desirable again. Trying to find those big hubcaps is very, very difficult. But at the time, there wasn't much love.
The original concept was they were going to. The idea was you would drive the car in the week. Bearing in mind, this was meant to be a car that would be an everyday car, not just a kind of weekend car like most Astons had been up to that point. And the idea was that you could drive the car in the week with the covers on, keep the wheel clean, and then at the weekend, or if you're going somewhere nice, you'd be able to remove them and expose these kind of delicate spokes. That was the actual concept behind it. But of course, in reality, they just came with the full cover. And then when we launched the car in the US, they had the smaller cover.
Yes.
And then everybody went nuts. Went, that's what we want. So people that had got early cars were buying those smaller, what we call a nave plate, and then they were throwing the frisbees in the bin. So as we called it, the frisbee, suddenly they were just chucked away, and they've become very rare things kind of ever since, really.
Mike, do you want to add anything about your car?
I think probably the main thing to say is that I'm not disappointed with it at all. It's having all those years thinking, oh, should I, shouldn't I? And then I bought it almost. It was almost an accidental find. I wasn't looking for a car, but was a sort of local small village car show, and one of the independent specialists were there. The owner and the sales guy were there, and we got talking. I said, always wanted a 7, and they said, oh, come and test drive one. We've got one actually. We're putting out through an auction. For different reasons, and so I shouldn't I? Anyway, I put a bid in, ended up the owner of it, but 10 months later I'm really, really pleased that I took the plunge. It's a fantastic car to drive.
Well, what would you say to someone who's looking to buy a DB7 and probably like you in the early days hesitating?
I'd say probably timing's brilliant, because realistically values are relatively low at the moment. That's my take on it. I haven't got a crystal ball, I'm not an expert, but relative to the car that you're getting, the values or the cost to buy them at the moment is pretty low. So ultimately, you've got to be brave to take decisions in life sometimes. But the key is do your homework. It's tricky because this is a heart over head or head over heart.
And be patient. Look around.
So look for a really good history on one. If you've got evidence, and a stamp book is good, but actually, if you've got a great big file of receipts that previous owners have kept that shows you all the work that's been done, then you're much better placed to assess the condition of that car. The fully stamped, book is good. It's a good start, but actually a bit of that evidence to say.
Mike, I think that's a very valid point. We did a podcast with John McGurk at McGurk Performance Cars. He was never, maybe simplifying it, he was never that impressed with a full stamped service book, because it doesn't say what's been done. Some people may just once a year just have an oil change and that's the end of it. So a folder full of receipts and a history of the work being done, that just gives you more comfort, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Jez, do you find any problems maintaining the car, parts supply?
Alternators, difficult to get hold of.
Okay.
No, generally the car's been really reliable. I've had a failed alternator and I've had 2 split oil pipes. But apart from that, the car's started on the button. I don't drive it as often as I should. It's on a trickle charger. It's been incredibly reliable, and I think that speaks volumes of Steve and his colleagues putting the car together. The only sort of funny thing, which always makes me laugh, I told a story earlier on today, was that at the 25th anniversary my car was on display, and there was Ian Callum was asked to choose the car he would like to take home. Fortunately, he chose my car, and I got a lovely plaque with it. But ironically, the car broke down on the way home. So even if he had chosen it, he wouldn't have made it home. So I'm glad he actually didn't take it.
The other thing I think we should say as well is that Jez's car was a factory car. So actually, you've got 3 Astons, 2 of them were factory-owned cars. So the DB4 Motor Show car, but also your car was a press car, and it still has an AML number plate, doesn't it?
Yeah, M1 AML, which was shown on the actual launch car. I think as we've discussed before, the very early 7s, or I think M1 AML up to M7 AML.
I thought I recognised the number plate.
Yeah.
Yes, it would have been in some magazines, etc.
So they were all on the launch cars. So very lucky.
Yeah,
really.
it looks really cool, doesn't it, on that plate? I mean, it just adds another little lovely touch to it.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, I look at your car, and the same with the one in the museum here. It just beams you back 30 years, because there is a 90s look to the early ones, and in a good way, And it's a proper time capsule, isn't it? And having that label on the sun visor, it's just those little details, isn't it, that just thankfully they survived and make it an even more interesting car.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe it's because it went through a few owners before I managed to locate it. But yeah, for that to still be there, and if you look at if you go into any of the early magazines where the press were taking them about, you can see, if they're in the interior shots, you can see the little plastic sleeve with the alarm information to sort of turn the alarm on and off and that. So no, really lucky. I mean, probably one of the only cars that's still got that. But
I think you're really lucky. I mean, it's the sort of thing I almost have a memory of getting in one and ripping it off. So quick, take that off. And get rid of the paper mats off the carpet where it'd been valeted or whatever. So yeah, things like that are just. They're become so rare because they just get thrown away in the heat of the moment. And you're making me realise now that I've probably peeled things off of other cars since then and thrown them in the bin.
You've ruined them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the irony of the historian ruining the history, but no, it is lovely, isn't it? And I guess if you're listening and if you're buying a brand new car and it comes with anything like that on it, even if you take it off, keep it somewhere safe because it could add to the car's history in 30 years' time.
Growing the passion, sharing the stories. The Aston Martin Heritage Podcast.
Of all the things we've ever worked on, we're all very proud of DB7 because it really did genuinely save the company from disappearing. And other cars have done great things since then. There's some very, you could argue DB9's another vitally important car, as was the Vantage, the V8 and V12 versions. But DB7, I think it was our kind of Dunkirk or our D-Day or whatever you want to call it, Battle of Britain. It was a big thing for all of us that were involved in it, and we've always had a lot of affection for it. Even when they finished making them, I remember us all kind of being, quite sort of, in a good way, quite emotional about it. The car had been around for nearly 10 years, and we actually celebrated it. We had we kind of called it the party in the park. We took over Buscott Park, National Trust property, and we filled it with DB7s. So we had nearly sort of 400 or so cars on the day. And I remember at the time, Ian Minars, who was the sales director, said, we're going to do the absolute opposite to what people would imagine we're going to do. We're going to celebrate the end of DB7 because DB9 was obviously coming out. And he said, let's go and celebrate it. Let's turn it into a positive thing rather than pretend it's not going to happen. And we were there, and we had a lineup of our own cars and important cars. And the last cars that were on the lineup were what they called the DB7 anniversary model. Really beautiful specification, kind of like a slate kind of blue colour with a two-tone custom kind of blue interior. And they look really, really elegant, and those were the cars that were deliberately being sold as the last cars, and there was a kind of clamber to get your hands on one of those. So it went out with a bang, and we loved it all the way through, and we all love it today.
Please do come along to the Aston Martin Heritage Festival on the 31st of August. Hear some more of these stories about the DB7s and the Mark II and the Ulster. If you don't have any of those cars, you have an Aston Martin or you are an enthusiast, please do still turn up. You would experience a great day out. There'll be a lovely selection of cars, Aston Martins from pre-war right up to DB12 and new Vantage, and it'll be such a great day out. If you do want to go, please go to our website www.amht.org.uk and you'll find all the information there, how to book tickets for the British Motor Museum, for the festival, and the dinner the night before at the David Brown Memorial Dinner with Nick Fry and other guests. As I mentioned, we'll have the stage and a unique arena area, and Steve, you'll be there along with Wayne Scott, and there'll be other guests there as well, won't there?
Yeah, we're hoping to get quite a few people from work to come along, people that are there currently and also retired people. So I don't want to commit anyone by name at the moment, but we're talking about sort of people that inspected the cars, people that built them, some of the performance driving instructors who used to demonstrate the cars and do the driving courses. So yeah, it should be really exciting. It won't just be me going on telling stories, it'll be other people as well. And I think it'll be great. I think, hopefully it'll be an educational day. People will learn about DB7 and about the Mark II and the Ulster when we talk to Tom. It should be really good, a good day and very exciting.
That's the end of this podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and I just want to thank Steve, Jez and Mike for being here today, being on the podcast, and more importantly, Jez and Mike for bringing your cars. It is much appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Steve, thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Discover more about the story of Aston Martin, the cars, the people, the history with the Aston Martin Heritage Trust. You're always welcome to visit us at our museum in Oxfordshire, so find out more via amht.org.uk.